Hey everyone, welcome to the Expert Roundtable on Future of Testing, how AI can accelerate release pipelines. Really excited to have you all here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome to be here.
Awesome. So I thought before we get into it, we go around the room just so everyone gets to know what your expertise is. So we'll start from the top and work our way down. So Nick.
Yeah, so I'm Nick Taylor. I'm currently working at Netlify in the ecosystem team, focusing on frameworks. So like whatever you deploy to Netlify, you know, I've got to make sure it's working, hopefully. I was also a lead front end before that, so I have a lot of front end experience and have done a lot of testing and setting up CI/CD pipelines for a lot of front end stuff. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Good to have you. Colby, how you been?
Good. It's nice to see you again. But
same.
Yeah, so I'm a developer experience engineer at Cloudinary, image and video platform for developers. A lot of my experience with testing, you know, of course, comes from some of the tooling that I've been working on now, but in previous jobs, kind of like Nick, where I had to deal with the entire application stack and how the tests and the DevOps infrastructure impacted that for running those tests.
Fantastic. And Christina, welcome.
Thank you. I am also a front-end engineer. That's my main role at the moment, but I've always had a passion for testing. And actually in a previous role, I was responsible mostly for setting up the automation, CI/CD, and also just sort of advocating for testing in general. I believe that if we could all just sort of collectively get over our problems with writing tests and maintaining them, then like software engineering would probably be a lot more enjoyable on the whole. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and excited to chat.
Awesome. So hey, that's a good jumping off point, Christina. Getting developers to get over that hurdle. You know, AI, it's been really big this year. Obviously, ChatGPT has been around for a while, but it seems to have really taken off this year. Do you see that as a way that maybe can help accelerate developers or give developers an easy way to get into testing and not have to spend time debugging a lot of unit tests or creating them themselves, just leveraging AI to help with that?
Yeah, I think that is one of the best parts of the generative AI tooling that we have now. You know, the other day I was working on, like, I just needed a hook to tell me if like a device was a touch device or something like that. And I started writing the function, and then GitHub Copilot just told me what the media query was, which was sort of magical, because before I even started writing the code, I was Googling how to detect this and I got a completely different answer. So I think what the magic is that it can tell you these things that it's almost like talking to a friend who, you know, has a neat trick for you to try. And definitely I think the like writer's block of writing a whole new test, versus just like letting something generate something for you and then you go and alter it is much easier just like cognitively to do.
No, I love that. So you're not saying it's replacing anything. It's almost enhancing or it's a jumping off point for creativity, for development almost. Awesome. So Nick, last time we spoke, I think you said you were messing around with Copilot, but you haven't tried GPT-3 at the time. Any updates on that?
Yeah, so I've been definitely using GitHub Copilot quite a bit. I actually got access to GitHub Copilot Chat yesterday, which is like ChatGPT, but baked into Visual Studio Code, and I believe also Visual Studio if you're in the .NET ecosystem. And I did get access to ChatGPT. I decided to sign up for the Plus just because I figured it was, at least for now, I thought it was just a money well spent to just kind of keep ramping up on these tools. And kind of like what Christina was saying, it's, you know, a friend showing you a trick or so on. It's definitely like, I don't I definitely agree. These things, at least right now, they're not going to replace us. It's really, I treat these things as another tool in my tool belt that, if anything, there's always those 10x developer memes. They could maybe become a little more truer because you have this little army of AI helping you out now. But I think these tools are super helpful, and they're a really great starting point. It doesn't, and it really depends on the prompting, and you hear a lot about prompt engineering. So one side effect of this is, especially if you're using like Copilot, but same with ChatGPT, is if you ask it and give as much context as possible, or to the best of your abilities, you're definitely going to get better answers. Like if I said, generate a test for a form, it might make something up. But if I say like, generate end-to-end test for a form that has like a first name, a last name, and like a date field or something, and it'll spit something out, but it might not even know what framework I was using. So then I could be more specific. Can you generate it using Playwright or Cypress or whatever end-to-end testing framework you're using? So I really see these as a way to just, allow you to focus on the more important work, and a lot of these things, which typically are boilerplate, because if you've done tests before, it's the same monotonous thing all the time, describe this, that, whatever. So if you can get like a huge chunk of that done right away, and again, it doesn't mean it's necessarily perfect, but I think it's already a great starting point, and that's where I see AI, at least right now, helping us out quite a bit.
Great. And Colby, I know you're familiar with AI from the visual regression testing perspective, but in your day-to-day operations, have you started to incorporate with any type of coding task that you need to achieve?
Yeah, so I've been playing around with the OpenAI SDK a lot, and a lot of what I've been doing is trying to create endpoints that can maybe take some kind of dynamic prompt and fit that in with the rest of my prompt I engineered and create something interesting like a custom Pokemon, which isn't practical but fun, right? But I think to their points, like there's a lot of things that these AI tools will allow us to empower us and enhance our workflows, not just simply replace it. And I think that's why we really need to embrace them and see how we can make them level up our current workflows. For instance, for testing, like I'm just thinking that context is super important. We can't really just throw a solution at a code base yet. Maybe someday we'll get that, but it still requires that extra spin up time to train based off the context of your application. But once you do, there's a lot of potential to help you out.
Absolutely. So I know when we talk about front end testing, a lot of times it's more like a functional type test, but nowadays I know you also need to be familiar with performance testing and things like stability testing. Does anyone see Nick, like when you do a deploy, do you see AI helping you to make sure that maybe before users know that the application is stable by maybe using some AI to maybe run some quick tests to verify that everything's working in production and then rolling back automatically, things like that?
Yeah, I haven't used it so much yet in that context, but I can definitely see it being super helpful. Like, say you have thresholds, and to be clear, code coverage isn't necessarily the best indicator of things, but whatever you decide your thresholds are, you can, having that in place, and then, having AI doing some checks, and then if it hits below that threshold, you can either warn or say like, yeah, we're not shipping this. And I think over time too, as because we've been talking about like OpenAI stuff, but if you think about maybe stuff local to your code base, if you have LLMs running for just your own code or like your company, it can gather history about your code base over time. And so then that's when it can say like, oh, maybe don't do that, like even before you put it in the pipeline potentially, or just at the start. And I think that's another avenue where I can see it being super helpful. Whereas, because I know there's, like we haven't touched on it, but there's like a privacy concern too. There's been some leaks where like some companies, they're like, oh, ChatGPT, this is so cool. How do I fix this code? And then all of a sudden there's some IP out there, not intentional, obviously, but so like I could also see a potential for people wanting these, private LLMs in the companies too, for those reasons.
So Christina, do you have any thoughts on security?
I think that when we're talking about these models, very often they are generic. So like Nick was sort of alluding to, some companies would not be happy to use something like ChatGPT. I know that I have colleagues, or like, not colleagues, I guess, but ex-colleagues that cannot use GitHub Copilot because their company is concerned about what this AI is reading. And I think that there's probably, we're just like sort of repeating some history about enterprise companies wanting to host their own stuff. So for example, like I know that startups might choose to use GitHub, but then established companies choose to use like their own hosted solution of like a GitHub or GitLab or something like that. So I think that there's definitely a future in letting companies train their own models and host them themselves, so that when they tell their stakeholders, because I think security is always about who you are beholden to, your customers. So they have to guarantee that like their data is going to stay locally. So yeah, I think that that's definitely something we should look into in terms of the like dev tooling side, is having more customized solutions.
Colby, any thoughts on security with AI specific?
Yeah, no, I think all that is interesting from a perspective of protecting customers' data and IP and stuff. And I also like to kind of think about doing code analysis when you are able to do that on code bases, and thinking about potential anomalies and ways that it can detect security issues in the code itself, rather, another side of the security aspect, right? And I think it's something that you might be able to just kind of throw that kind of solution at the code base, because it doesn't need a lot of context aside from reading that code base and trying to see and poke holes where you might not even think about it.
Absolutely. So now I've spoken to a bunch of AI experts, and a lot of them say, because of the cost of AI models within house to actually learn a real specific application, that companies not going to have their own AI models for their particular application. So they don't see AI really taking off in a huge way because of that. Does anyone see that as well? Or AI, it seems like it still can assist with maybe higher level things rather than lower level, really guts and nitty gritty of the application. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I could see things potentially being cost prohibitive for some people. Obviously, like a larger company, they'll probably just say, let's just do it because it just makes sense. But yeah, I don't know if like a smaller startup could, but like maybe because I know there's a lot of open source alternate software that you can use and to train like internally, but maybe just based on the cost, like maybe the models wouldn't be as large, or who knows, maybe it's a combination of what they have in-house, even if it's not as large, kind of combined with, like, I wonder if you could have like private and public, and somehow not leak out stuff. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but
Yeah, I think if you look at what's happening in the generative image space, people a few years ago were saying that it takes, so many resources, you need so many samples, images, and now you can train your own face in like 15 images. So there's definitely advances happening, and I wouldn't necessarily say that it's always going to be hard or always going to be expensive. At least that's the optimistic view.
I think there's a great point there, especially like from a cost perspective, because like we're really seeing a lot of bleeding edge stuff where people are really excited about it. Of course, there's a demand there, but as they kind of optimize and learn where they can make sense of those costs, I think we'll greatly see that go down. Especially, I think there were big advancements between even GPT 3.5 between 4, right? So I think the more that they keep pushing on this, we'll see costs go down and make it more accessible for people. But still, the fact that there is so much potential in open source models, like you can really spend the time to do that yourself if you kind of learn how to do it.
Absolutely. So earlier we talked about how AI is almost like a friend or someone that can give you some advice and then you could take it or not or approve on it. So, how much would you trust AI to actually write test cases for maybe front-end development? And do you think that would help with overall test coverage? Let's start with Christina. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that's the more interesting part about this is I don't think we should be just blindly, obviously, trusting these models. At the end of the day, they've just sort of gathered some information from the internet and they're just presenting it to you in a way that predictively makes sense. So the machines don't actually think. And the other side that's kind of bothering me is that it's becoming so easy to write code. I mean, we've always had the jokes about copy pasting from Stack Overflow. But now it's so easy to write a big boilerplate thing. Like previously we were talking about, oh, this makes it easier. But, I would like to see a feature where we don't have to write so much code because every piece of code you write is a piece of code to maintain. So yes, you can probably generate thousands of lines of test cases, but I think the magic is in taking that as just an input to your own large language model and then producing something from that.
Absolutely. Colby or Nick, any thoughts add on?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting potential for like the natural language part of this. And I think, broadly speaking, the whole natural language like ChatGPT isn't necessarily the future of application development, but for test cases, I was talking to Nick about this. Gherkin is a pattern that you can already use somewhat natural language to define a test case. And I'm thinking about it like whether it's Gherkin or an inspiration of it where you can specify that natural language and it turns it into confident test cases. That might be an easier way to start to list out. So you can define a user story and have it automatically scaffold that test for it.
Absolutely. So Nick, when you had that conversation, any other insights you had as well?
Well, the nice thing about that, like Gherkin or whatever you use, is it's a standard. So like the output would probably be pretty uniform and consistent, So I can definitely see stuff like that definitely helping. And like, we tried using Gherkins. It sounds funny saying that, but years ago at another company I was at, and it didn't really pick up. But the interesting thing about the Gherkins is, yes, a dev can write them, but like when we were trying to put them in place, it was kind of like the product owner or whoever was championing that feature that would potentially write those. So it also gives this nice dynamic where you might not be as technical as other people, but you can still generate specifications that will generate tests potentially, but they still need to be validated. But again, it gets back to what I was saying before, where the more we can, like the power I see in AI is allowing us to focus on more important business value than the mundane or like just monotonous boilerplate stuff. And to Christina's point too, I definitely agree. Like we shouldn't accept these things blindly. Like, okay, ChatGPT generated like 2,000 component tests for me. Ship it. Like there still needs to be the human aspect to it, because like Christina alluded to, it's not, these things aren't smart. They're just it's like given these certain inputs, this is what I think makes sense. So. And, but again, I still think it's a potential great starting point, or like maybe it even gets you 3/4 of the way. But it's the other thing too, like not so much with like unit tests and stuff, but like in front end testing, there's like accessibility that you have to take into an account too. And I definitely think you can automate some accessibility testing, and there's great plugins. Like I know when I worked at Dev2 prior to Netlify, we were using the Axe plugin for component tests, and it would definitely catch things, but it's not like the end all be all. You still need like the human component. So again, it's like another thing in your tool belt, I think.
That's a great point. Accessibility testing has been very hot the past few years. And the reason a lot of people struggle is that it is a big upfront cost to manually do a lot of these things. But leveraging AI, Nick gave an example, Colby or Christina. Any thoughts you see AI being helped with things like accessibility testing then?
Yeah, I was reading up on this because, frankly, I think many companies don't really walk the walk with accessibility. It's just not something that a startup is going to invest money into. So personally never had much opportunity to do a lot of accessibility testing. And, you know, often when you do it, you know, if you run your Lighthouse report or something, you find, oh, our app is terrible at accessibility. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of things in the space. One thing that is possibly accessibility and also potentially related to just UX in general is eye tracking studies. So we do eye tracking studies to kind of see where people look on the screen and to predict, you know, like, will they be able to find the important information and things like that. And we can train AIs on existing eye tracking studies that we've done to predict what a new eye tracking study would give, which I think is quite cool. So you can avoid having to actually do that study, and you can just put your app through a model to get some information at least. Which was, yeah, I think that's a really cool application.
Yeah, I love that real world example. Colby, you work a lot with video. Does it make it harder to work with AI because it is video? But it sounds like if you can track eyeballs, then you probably could track something in video, right?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I haven't really thought about it from that perspective. But a note on the accessibility part, like also from like an inclusion part, I was thinking about how AI, you know, given it isn't a large language model that a lot of the stuff we're working with, it can look at the copy on the page too, you know, beyond just like the layout, the colors and stuff, and actually make sure that the language is being used beyond grammar is something that people are going to feel comfortable with, people are going to feel inclusive with, and, you know, ways to make sure that we all have better copy for the world.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of the activities we spoke about have been shift left, but I want to go back to like maybe CI/CD pipelines or even production. Do you see AI being able to maybe act as a sniffer to what customers are really doing and then bubble up insights? Then you can say, is this a real issue or not? Like performance last week was X amount, but I'm noticing customers interacting with this component now seeing this thing. So you may want to look at it. Is that something that sounds realistic to leverage AI for? Colby's shaking his head, so I'm going to go with you, Colby.
Yeah, totally. Like I was thinking about things like access logs where, you know, there's totally solutions around trying to parse access logs, but it's never a fun thing. And it's always a hard challenge. So, you know, how can we use that more predictive nature of these tools to parse those at, you know, at large scales and really find those anomalies? I think there's a lot of potential there.
Great. Christina, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we want to be able to detect abnormalities in production code as well. Another thing that I was thinking about is when you receive an error from, either you found an error through like your logs or you got an error during the build, those errors are often quite hard to understand. And especially if you have less experience, you might see an error and go, wow, like I really broke everything. What do you mean? Undefined is not an object. So I think what could be an interesting application of these tools, like maybe GitHub Copilot or our own like dev tools, is it could tell you what the error means, or tell you some more information about like where you could go to explore the error more. I'm also thinking about when you get an error from your jest, or, you know, your component tests, those are often very, very hard to parse because they'll just give you the whole HTML tree. Mm-hmm. And so I don't even know if you need AI for it, but it would be nice if something could tell you, hey, the important part is over here. Yeah, so I think that would be super useful.
Something to actually trace the untraceable stack traces.
Exactly.
Love it. Nick, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I definitely like the idea of the parse and the logs, because one thing that could be interesting, like over time, as it over the course of deployments, they'll also be able to detect like, hey, well, this error's happened before, it's probably related to this, like just because it learns air quotes learns, but, you'll be able to potentially stop future bugs just by saying, like, failing the build, say like this looks a little suspect. Like we already have tools for analyzing code. They're not all necessarily machine learning, but I could like for example, GitHub has like CodeQL, which I don't think is using machine learning, and it's using some kind of heuristics, but like I could see machine learning enhancing these tools. And the other thing too is like getting back to the errors, like Christina and Colby were saying, like every time I get an error, like I always Google it, I'll use ChatGPT or Copilot chat now, I guess, because I have access to it. But, pasting in the whole error is typically not useful because, it's going to have your local file system in the error or something, and, potentially other things. So like, it'd be kind of cool if, because normally what I do is like, I will cut out pieces of the error I get, and then I would Google that, and then I would find something. And it'd be kind of neat if you could just paste in your errors as is. It's able to go, okay, yeah, no, this isn't important. This is important. Okay, this is what the real thing is. And then getting back to like what we've reiterated a few times as context is like there could be a red herring, like Christina was saying, and I'm still not sure where that red herring expression comes from. That's a side note, but like this undefined is not an object. It could be totally not the issue, and like by being able to check the stack trace or the context of what happened, over time, they could potentially give better solutions to this. And there's a lot of tools out there now too. This is not necessarily AI, but like, I know like Sentry or Replay.io, they have like, you can get like literally everything the user did, replay it. So I could see, like, imagine feeding that into, a model, like I could see that being super powerful too, in terms of just being able to better tell you about things going on.
So Nick, I just asked ChatGPT where the phrase red herring came from. Apparently it comes from the 17th century, from an old method of training dogs for hunting.
Okay.
If you want to know, we all know now. Yes.
All right.
Thank you,
You're welcome,
Session
Front End
closed.
Test Fest. Yeah, that's it. That's a wrap, people.
So speaking of wrapping it up, we actually have just a few minutes left. I thought we'd go around the room just to get some final thoughts. The name of the session is Future of Testing. So we've already talked about maybe some scenarios where AI can help, but do you see, maybe I'll ask each of you, where do you see the future then of AI within front-end development and testing? So Colby, we'll start with you this time.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, one of the more interesting things that I'm looking forward to is being able to throw all your context at something, have it learn and train all that, and be able to just poke holes, and kind of like the chaos monkey concept. It was Netflix, right? Being able to have a more intelligent chaos monkey that's able to go through and try to look at all those different layers and try to figure out where there's potential issues that you might have never thought about before. So I think, the more context you feed into it, the smarter it'll be for your situation, and there's some interesting potential there.
Great. How about you, Christina?
Yeah, I don't know. I think everyone's very scared about the future of AI and all of us losing our jobs. And, I comfort myself that I will welcome our robot overlords. I think that, I really do think we're far away from that happening. And I also think that it would be cool if we could move away from generating code and really move towards having clever solutions, like not having to write so much code, and not having to get a robot to write code that then also feeds into another robot to show it to humans on their browser. So it's a very strange world we find ourselves in. I'm nervous, but I'm also very excited, because if you just look at what also is happening in other spaces of AI. It's scary, but it's also people are doing amazing creative things with it. And so I wouldn't necessarily say the future is bleak. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff that we can look forward to, at least in the next 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely. And Nick?
Yeah, I can throw out that Spider-Man uncle, with great power comes great responsibility, I guess. But what I'm most excited for is really just tooling getting better, having our little helpers or friends like we were talking about. There's I came across an interesting open source project recently called Small Developer. And the idea is you have these little agents, and it's kind of like the Unix philosophy for do one thing and do it well. So you could have just all these little agents doing specific things that it's really good at. Because, when you ask ChatGPT or something, it's like, I know everything, like I'm the Oracle and I'll give you an answer for whatever you ask me. Whereas this other thing could be like, I'm good at debugging, I'm good at error detection, or, and I see that being super interesting. And I'm just excited to see these tools get better because, people complain about them a bit already, but it's I don't know. I love what I do, and it's amazing to wake up every day, and I can't believe that I get to be a web developer, and there's all these awesome tools and technology advances, and I don't know, just keeps me excited about working in this space.
Absolutely. Very awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the Front End Test Fest. Really appreciate you. I think we have a poll that we asked. I want to get your opinion on the poll before we get to the questions. Everyone's so silent. Just make sure I can. All right.
Hey.
Thank you. Okay, cool. So the poll question was: are you using AI to optimize your workflow in your current project? Majority of the people said no or not yet. And just curious to know if anyone has a strong opinion on: do you see this changing? Do you see this as a status quo? What could be maybe a roadblock to having people do this? Anyone have any thoughts on that poll result? I'm gonna call on people.
All right. I can break the silence, I guess. I'm good at breaking silence. Yeah, I think it'll start coming more and more into projects, but there's, like we were talking about, there was the cost prohibitiveness in some cases maybe, but like Colby was alluding to during the panel, like any technology, like for example, I have no plans to buy that new Apple Vision Pro at $3,500, even though I need new snowboard goggles. But as that technology gets better, it's gonna become more of a commodity and rapidly go, well, I'm guessing, but I remember when I grew up in the 80s, and I remember when we got a VCR, if anybody knows what that is. Basically, it was super expensive at the time, but now they're so cheap, and now you can't even find it because it's so outdated. But I think with that parallel, you'll see these prices go down, like Colby was alluding to, and I think maybe that's where you'll see more adoption go up. But for bigger companies, maybe I don't know. I feel like people are still kind of testing the lay of the land. I don't know what others think, but
great insight, Nick.
I think that you. Thanks. I think that the biggest mistake you can make with this new AI tooling is not to use it. There's no way that you can roll back the clock. I saw a really cool video about the development of AI, and we had it in one of our. We had an AI film festival, and someone had made this video about this ratcheting effect, where if you ratchet forward, you cannot go back, right? And we've already ratcheted forward. There's no way to now say, okay, no, I don't want this. And so the only thing you really can do is use the tools in order to stay up to date and know what's out there. So I think that it's a matter of time for companies to be using this. If it makes you faster, there's really no reason why why companies are not going to jump onto that bandwagon pretty soon.
Absolutely. I was there for the first paradigm shift when the internet just started. Everyone's like, it's not a real business. No one knows how to make money on it. And then people
Yeah.
that ignored it totally got left behind. I see the same thing with AI, but AI seems to be accelerating even quicker. So great point, Christina. Don't ignore it because I'll catch up on you.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome insights. So I thought we'd go to the first question. And I don't know, does anyone have any favorites, or are there any AI extensions for Cypress testing with JavaScript?
I don't know of any offhand. Maybe somebody from Cyprus can tell us.
I asked ChatGPT, not even lying. And Applitools eyes was the answer that I received. So not sure how whether or not that does actually answer the question, but that's what AI told me.
Well, how about Applitools Visualize? That's AI based, right? And I guess it integrates with Cypress, so I think that would be something for sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing to mention, because like I've built like a ton of custom stuff in Cypress. You can create custom commands, so I don't see why people can just get creative and start tapping into whatever they want to do from an AI perspective. Like all this stuff we discussed on the panel, you could potentially hook that into a custom side command. I don't know. It's also an easy way to answer it without knowing.
Cool. All right, let's hop to the next question. Next question is, if you could only use AI for one or the other, would you use it to help write your code or your test? Ooh.
I like that one.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Come on.
I personally see more potential on the testing side of things. I don't know, but I'm very particular about my code, and AI can take you pretty far, but only so far, right? Where I feel like testing has a lot more opportunity to kind of be autonomous in how it's actually trying to break and ensure that you're maintaining that quality.
Christina, I think you unmuted there for a second.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if I could only have one, then neither. But I'd probably go with write the code with AI because it's kind of like, at least I can supervise it with my tastes. So I would still be in charge in that case.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to give a it depends answer because like I think if it would be something complex in the code that maybe I'm not familiar with, like maybe I have to implement some kind of algorithm that I've never used before, I'd be inclined to get ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot X or whatever to help me guide me there. I'd obviously still check it, after the fact, like we mentioned in the panel, but if it's like more like the code is like, I don't want to say run of the mill, but it's like nothing like where my brain is really hurting trying to figure out on a complex problem, I would lean more towards just generating the tests. So I'm divided, I guess.
Okay. All right. Yep. I guess they're all valid depending on your point of view. So let's go to the next question then. Also on AI, if you're already using AI, how often does utilization of AI results in mistakes that go to overlook due to either time constraints or over resilience? I don't know how many of you are actually using this hardcore, but anyone have any examples of this happening in the wild?
This happened to me a couple of times in small ways where the generated code sort of works, but in a very a hidden way, it doesn't work, and you didn't write that code, so you don't know that there's this bug in it. And so in that way, it can be more frustrating than just doing it the hard way and writing it yourself. I think over time, we'll see more bigger impacts as maybe fresher developers coming in and not having to learn a lot of code themselves. Maybe they're skipping over some important lessons when they're using these tools, but that could just be kind of like old man shouting at a cloud emoji. the same thing was said about tools that I used when I was starting out. So interesting to see what's going to come.
Good point.
And I think the troubling thing we need to kind of be weary of is how confident it can be in its responses, right? And I don't know if you ever tried in ChatGPT, if you're generating like a function, it'll even give you some tests to show that it's working. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is completely confidently working.
Yeah,
I've
no,
seen some
definitely.
developers who were pretty confident that their stuff was working and it wasn't though.
Narrator. It was not. It was not. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I don't think the confidence level is always there yet, at least. And this gets back to also providing good context. Like, I remember when I started using Copilot, I started typing and it would start auto completing and telling me like, okay, do this, do this, do this. And then I kind of realized how to use the tool better. And I've found that like providing comments first about what I'd like to do, and then it generates more accurately. But again, even with really good context, it still might not be the right thing. So this gets back to the human aspect where, like I was saying in the panel, like I think it could maybe even get you 3/4 of the way there, but you still need that, like I am not a robot, click the captcha and then finish the code kind of thing. So
Great.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question before we wrap, but I want to thank our panelists for sharing today.
Absolutely. So Becca, you choose the last question.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and show this one. How will AI make the work of QAs easier? Or maybe we should add, will it? Nick, you're going to start us off.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've only actually worked at one place with dedicated QAs. And it was a larger company, Autodesk. Everywhere else I've worked, it's usually been the developers we write our tests as well. Like, and we just didn't have a separate department. But again, I don't know, having seen QA testers when I did have a department, they did extensive manual testing for stuff that they couldn't, script, at least at the time. So I'm hoping to see AI be able to alleviate a lot of that. And again, it's not to remove the jobs. If anything, it's to allow them to do more or like be more productive about more important things, So I think I'd be interested to see like if AI can just improve some things that people still have to manual test.
And I think some of that's already here. I think we're seeing with some of the code generation, but I think using tools like Applitools, for instance, one of our grateful sponsors of the conference, I think it's able to eliminate flakiness, which is a big part of making QA's lives horrible, right? So being able to eliminate some of that and really just improve on the quality of the tests will really help us go pretty far.
Absolutely. And for folks that haven't tried Applitools or want to learn more, they just popped it up down below. So if you really want to get in on the AI game or try it out, as Colby mentioned, you can try it out for yourself now as well. So thank you, experts. Once again, mind-blowing session. Really love you all. Thank you for all your answers and contributing to Front End Test Fest. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, always great hanging out, Joe, and always great hanging out with you too, Becca, and everybody. Thanks.
What about me?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Colby.
You too.
It was so fun.